The crystal chandeliers of the Morrison Tower ballroom cast dancing shadows across hundreds of faces, all gathered for the annual corporate gala. David Warren stood near the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, watching his wife Rebecca laugh a little too loudly at something her boss was saying. Victor Brennan. The name tasted like acid in David's mouth. For 6 months, David had watched his marriage crumble. Rebecca came home later each night, her excuses growing thinner. Working on the Henderson account, she'd say. Victor needs me to stay late. The perfume that wasn't hers. The new lingerie he never saw her wear at home. The whispered phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered a room. But David Warren hadn't become a senior data analyst by ignoring patterns. He'd started noticing other things too. The way Victor Brennan ruled the sales department like a personal fiefdom. The hushed conversations among female employees. The HR complaints that mysteriously vanished. The board members who seemed conveniently blind to whispers of misconduct. 3 weeks ago, David had made a decision. He'd contacted an old college friend, Thomas, who now worked in corporate litigation. Together, they'd built a case, quietly gathering evidence. David had installed a recording app on his phone, documented every suspicious incident, and most importantly, he'd reached out to Margaret Hollis, the one board member with a reputation for integrity. Tonight was supposed to be Rebecca's triumphant evening. She'd just closed the biggest deal in the company's history, or so everyone believed. David knew the truth. He'd seen the files on her laptop, the ones she'd forgotten to close. Victor had stolen the Henderson account from junior associate Paula Hendricks, reassigned it to Rebecca, and now they'd both take credit for Paula's work. David. There you are. Rebecca's voice cut through his thoughts. She approached with Victor's hand possessively placed on the small of her back. Her red dress, the one David had never seen before, clung to her figure. Victor's purchase, no doubt. Darling, she said, her smile tight. Victor wants to make an announcement. Victor Brennan was everything David despised. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit stretched over a frame kept fit by a personal trainer and pharmaceutical enhancement. His smile was all teeth and predatory confidence. Big night, Warren, Victor said, not bothering to shake David's hand. Your wife's a star. We're celebrating properly tonight. David noticed the flush in Rebecca's cheeks, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes. He felt the phone in his pocket, already recording. Margaret Hollis had texted him 20 minutes ago, in position. Security footage is recording. HR director standing by with documentation. Congratulations, David said evenly. I'm sure Rebecca worked very hard. Oh, she did, Victor's grin widened. Very hard. Very dedicated. Rebecca's laugh was forced. Victor, we should. Ladies and gentlemen. Victor's voice boomed across the ballroom. The crowd quieted, turning toward them. David felt his heart rate increase, but his hand remained steady. Everything was recording. The board members Margaret had alerted were scattered through the crowd, watching. I want to celebrate an extraordinary achievement, Victor continued, pulling Rebecca closer. The Henderson deal, worth $50 million, secured by the brilliant Rebecca Warren. He paused. Well, Rebecca for now. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. David saw Rebecca's face pale. But let's be honest about who really runs things in this department, Victor said, his voice taking on an edge. The whiskey on his breath was evident even from several feet away. About who calls the shots. About who decides who succeeds and who fails. David watched Victor's hand slide from Rebecca's back, around her waist, pulling her against him possessively. Several people gasped. He saw junior employees backing away, senior staff exchanging alarmed glances. Sir, Rebecca whispered urgently. Maybe we should. Should what? Victor's voice turned cold. He looked directly at David. Should pretend? Should keep up appearances? Then Victor did something that made the entire room go silent. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a scrap of lace, women's underwear. Black. Expensive. He held them up for a moment, letting recognition dawn across Rebecca's mortified face, before throwing them at David's feet. She's mine tonight, Warren, Victor declared. Hell, she's been mine for months. Your wife. My toy. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Gasps of shock, hurried whispers, the scrape of chairs as people stood. David remained perfectly still, staring at the crumpled lace at his feet. His phone continued recording in his pocket. Every word. Every gasp. Every witness. Rebecca's face had gone from red to white. Victor, what are you promised? Promised what? Victor laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. That we'd be discreet? Why? Look at him. He gestured dismissively at David. What's he going to do? He's nothing. A data monkey who doesn't even satisfy his own wife. David finally moved, bending down slowly. But he didn't pick up the underwear. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket, held it up, and tapped the screen. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Recording stopped. Duration, 43 minutes. He looked directly at Victor. Thank you for being so thorough. Victor's smile faltered. What? I said, thank you. David's voice grew stronger. You see, Victor, you're not the only one who keeps records. You're just the sloppiest. From across the room, Margaret Hollis stepped forward, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her expression glacial. Two other board members flanked her, Richard Sutton and Patricia Vance. Behind them came Helen Park, the HR director, and two security officers. Mr. Brennan, Margaret's voice carried across the stunned silence. I think we need to have a conversation. Now. Victor's face reddened. This is MY department. Margaret. You have no authority. Actually, Patricia Vance interrupted, her legal background evident in her crisp tone, we have every authority. We're the board of directors, and we've just witnessed you commit sexual harassment, create a hostile work environment, and admit to an affair with a subordinate. All fireable offenses. It's not, Rebecca wanted, Victor sputtered. Did she want you to humiliate her husband in public? Richard Sutton asked coldly. Did she want you to throw her underwear at him like some kind of trophy? Rebecca found her voice, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know he would. David, please, I can explain. Can you? David's voice was quiet but cut through the noise. Can you explain the 6 months of lies? The late nights that weren't about work? The way you looked me in the eye every morning and pretended everything was fine? Mr. Warren, Helen Park approached carefully. I understand this is incredibly difficult. But I need to inform you that HR has received multiple complaints about Mr. Brennan over the past 2 years. Complaints that were mishandled. Buried, you mean, David said. By Victor's friends in HR. The old HR director, Jeffrey Mills, who conveniently retired last month. Helen's eyes widened. How did you? Because I'm not nothing, David said, his eyes never leaving Victor's face. I'm a senior data analyst who spent 3 months tracking email patterns, document deletions, and communication logs. I know about the 5 other women Victor has harassed. I know about the promotions tied to sexual favors. I know about the deals stolen from junior employees and reassigned to Victor's favorites. The crowd had pressed closer now, phones out, recording. David saw several news reporters who'd been covering the gala for the business section. This would be everywhere by morning. You recorded me. Victor's voice rose. That's illegal. You can't. Actually, Thomas emerged from the crowd, David's lawyer friend now his legal representative. In this state, only one party needs to consent to recording. David consented. He recorded in a public space. Everything's admissible. Victor lunged toward David, but the security officers intercepted him. You son of a, this is about her rejecting you, isn't it? Your inadequacy. No, David said calmly. This is about you believing you're untouchable. About you destroying careers and marriages because you could. About you creating a culture of fear where women had to choose between their dignity and their jobs. We chose. Rebecca shouted suddenly. I chose this. I wanted the promotion, the recognition. Victor gave me opportunities you never could. David finally looked at his wife. Really looked at her. You're right. I could never give you what Victor gave you. I could never make you compromise your ethics. I could never make you betray everyone who trusted you. I could never make you steal from colleagues or lie to your husband. You're absolutely right, Rebecca. I could never do that. Paula Hendricks stepped forward from the crowd, her young face determined. The Henderson account was mine. I spent 8 months building that relationship. Victor took it from me 2 weeks before closing and gave it to Rebecca. When I complained, I was told I was too junior for such responsibility. That's business, Victor snarled. Deal with it. No, Margaret Hollis said firmly. That's theft. That's abuse of power. And it ends tonight. She turned to the security officers. Escort Mr. Brennan to his office. He's to collect only personal items. His company access is revoked immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation. You can't do this. Victor struggled against the security officers. I built this department. I made this company millions. You exploited women and stole credit, Patricia Vance corrected. There's a difference. As Victor was led away, still protesting, the crowd began to disperse in excited whispers. David stood in the center of it all, the underwear still at his feet, his wife sobbing a few feet away. Margaret approached him. Mr. Warren, I apologize. If we'd known earlier. You did know, David interrupted quietly. You all knew. You just didn't want to see it. The Morrison Tower boardroom at midnight was a different beast than the celebratory ballroom had been hours earlier. Harsh fluorescent lights replaced crystal chandeliers. The elegant party had devolved into a corporate crisis meeting. David sat at the long mahogany table, Thomas beside him. Across from them sat Margaret Hollis, Patricia Vance, Richard Sutton, and 2 other board members, Daniel Corbin and Yuki Tanaka. Helen Park from HR had her laptop open, her face pale as she scrolled through files. Rebecca had been escorted to a separate conference room. Victor was in his office under security supervision, his computer already being imaged by the IT department. I need to understand the full scope, Margaret said, her earlier composure showing cracks. How long have you been investigating? 3 months of active investigation, David replied. But I noticed problems for 6 months before that. Small things at first. Rebecca's mood changes. The way she'd flinch when I mentioned work. Then I started seeing patterns in the company's promotion data. He pulled out his tablet, connected it to the room's display screen. Graphs and charts appeared, cold, hard data that told a devastating story. Over the past 4 years, women in the sales department have had a 68% higher turnover rate than men. Of the women who stayed, 73% reported directly to Victor Brennan. Of those women, 42% received rapid promotions within 6 months of beginning to work closely with him. Yuki Tanaka leaned forward. That could be coincidence. Victor might simply be good at mentoring. Look at the next slide, David interrupted. The screen changed. These are the same women's performance reviews from before they worked with Victor. All rated excellent to exceptional. Now look at what happened to them after their relationship with Victor ended. The data was damning. Transfers to dead-end positions. Sudden performance improvement plans. Resignations within months. He used them up and threw them away, Patricia whispered. Not just that, David continued. He ensured they couldn't speak out. Look at the settlement agreements. Helen Park looked up from her laptop. Oh my God. Jeffrey Mills in HR made 12 women sign NDAs in the past 4 years. All with Victor Brennan listed as the involved party. The company paid out over $2 million in hush money. Jeffrey retired to the Bahamas last month, Daniel Corbin said slowly. On a pension that shouldn't have supported that lifestyle. Because Victor made sure he was well compensated for his discretion, David said. I found the payments. Consulting fees, bonuses, all approved by Victor's department budget. Margaret's hands trembled slightly. This company could be destroyed by this. The lawsuits alone will be substantial, Thomas agreed. But less substantial if you act decisively now. Full transparency, cooperation with investigations, restitution to victims. Victims, Richard Sutton repeated. Paula Hendricks. Who else? David brought up another slide. Names and faces appeared, 9 women in total. These are the ones I could identify. There are likely more. One face stood out on the screen, Nadia Foster, a former senior associate who'd left the company 18 months ago. I remember Nadia, Yuki said. Brilliant strategist. She was on the partner track, then suddenly resigned. Victor said she couldn't handle the pressure. Victor got her pregnant, David said quietly. The room went silent. She miscarried at 12 weeks. When she told Victor, he ordered her to keep working through it or face termination. She resigned instead and signed an NDA to get 6 months severance. Patricia Vance stood abruptly, walking to the window. We failed these women. We sat in this room and approved budgets, reviewed reports, and we failed them. Yes, David said simply. You did. But you can start making it right. Helen Park's fingers flew across her keyboard. I'm documenting everything. Every complaint that was dismissed, every NDA, every suspicious promotion. Mr. Warren, would you be willing to share your findings with the authorities? Already done, David replied. I sent everything to the State Labor Board, the EEOC, and the District Attorney's Office 3 days ago. They were waiting for tonight's incident to move forward. Margaret's eyes widened. You orchestrated this. The public confrontation. I gave Victor the opportunity to show everyone who he really is, David corrected. He made his own choices. I just ensured there were witnesses and evidence. And your wife? Richard asked carefully. Rebecca was complicit in some of this. For the first time that night, David's composure cracked slightly. Rebecca made her choices too. The affair, that's personal. But she knew about Paula Hendricks. She knew the Henderson account wasn't hers. She benefited from Victor's system. What do you want, Mr. Warren? Margaret asked. From us, from this company. David was quiet for a moment. I want the 9 women I identified to be offered compensation without NDAs. I want Paula Hendricks to get full credit and commission for the Henderson deal. I want a complete audit of Victor's department going back 5 years. And I want a new HR infrastructure that actually protects employees instead of management. That's reasonable, Patricia said. What else? I want Victor Brennan prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, David's voice hardened. Not just fired. Not just sued. I want criminal charges. Sexual harassment, coercion, potentially assault depending on what the other women reveal. I want him to face real consequences. Thomas nodded approvingly. My firm is prepared to represent any of Victor's victims pro bono. We're also prepared to support a class action lawsuit if the victims choose to pursue one. The company will cooperate fully, Margaret said firmly, looking at her fellow board members. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. There's one more thing, David said. Rebecca. The room tensed. She violated company policy by engaging in a relationship with her supervisor. She benefited from preferential treatment. She participated in stealing credit from Paula Hendricks. David's voice remained steady. But I need to know, if I hadn't been involved, if this had been any other employee, what would the consequence be? Helen Park answered without hesitation. Immediate termination. No exceptions. David nodded slowly. Then that's what should happen. No special treatment because she's my wife. No leniency because I'm the whistleblower. David, Margaret started. No, he interrupted. If this company is going to change, it changes for everyone. Equal standards. Rebecca faces the same consequences as anyone else would. The sun rose over Morrison Tower at 6:47 a.m., painting the steel and glass structure in shades of amber and gold. By then, the story had already exploded across social media, business news sites, and morning television programs. Corporate boss humiliates husband in affair scandal read one headline. Tech firm executive expelled after public harassment proclaimed another. But the story that gained the most traction was from Paula Hendricks herself, who'd posted a detailed thread on social media at 3 a.m., describing how her career-making deal had been stolen and given to her supervisor's mistress. By 8 a.m., Morrison Tower scandal was trending nationally. David sat in his apartment, the one he'd secretly rented 2 weeks ago, preparing for this moment, watching the news coverage. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Interview requests. Messages of support. Former Morrison Tower employees coming forward with their own stories. His personal phone showed 73 missed calls from Rebecca. He'd listened to the first voicemail, heard her sobbing apologies and desperate justifications. He'd deleted the rest. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Thomas entered with coffee and a stack of documents. The DA's office wants to meet this afternoon, Thomas said. They have enough for criminal charges against Brennan, sexual harassment, coercion, and they're investigating potential financial crimes. The audit of his department revealed some interesting expense reports. How interesting. Company funds paid for hotel rooms, jewelry, trips, all disguised as business expenses. We're talking about potential embezzlement in the six-figure range. David nodded, unsurprised. And the women? 7 of the 9 you identified have agreed to speak with investigators. Nadia Foster is flying in from Seattle tomorrow. Her lawyer contacted me. She wants to sue both Brennan and the company. She should. They failed her. Thomas sat down, his expression serious. The company's offering you a settlement. Significant one. 7 figures, NDA attached, immediate resignation. No. I haven't told you the amount. I don't care about the amount, David said firmly. If I take hush money and disappear, what message does that send? That everything has a price? That if you pay enough, the truth goes away? That's admirably principled, Thomas said carefully. But David, your wife's affair with your boss is now national news. Your marriage is over. Your workplace is toxic. Taking the money and starting fresh somewhere else isn't surrender, it's survival. David stood, walking to the window. From 18 floors up, he could see Morrison Tower in the distance. Do you know what Victor said to me once? At a company barbecue 2 years ago. He told me that successful people understand that everything, loyalty, integrity, relationships, is transactional. Everything can be bought or sold. Sounds like Victor. I told him he was wrong. He laughed at me, called me naive. David turned back to Thomas. I won't prove him right by accepting blood money. I'll accept a fair severance for my work, nothing more. No NDA. I keep the right to speak about what happened. Thomas smiled slightly. I told Margaret you'd say that. She's prepared to offer 6-month severance, continuation of benefits for a year, and a neutral reference. No NDA. And Rebecca? Terminated this morning. She's been offered the same severance package as any terminated employee, 2 weeks. She's refusing to accept it, demanding to speak with you. No. David. No, David repeated. Rebecca made her choices. She chose ambition over integrity. She chose Victor's lies over our marriage. She chose to humiliate me, to betray me, to participate in a system that destroyed other women's careers. I don't owe her forgiveness. I don't owe her closure. I owe her nothing. His phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. David answered. Mr. Warren? This is Detective Linda Reeves with the District Attorney's Office. We'd like to discuss your evidence against Victor Brennan. Of course. When would you like to meet? This afternoon, if possible. We're also interested in speaking with you about Rebecca Warren's involvement. Our investigation suggests she may have been aware of and participated in several instances of workplace fraud beyond the Henderson account theft. David felt something cold settle in his chest. What kind of fraud? Contract manipulation, false billing, kickbacks from vendors. We're still investigating, but if your wife was as close to Mr. Brennan as evidence suggests, she may have been complicit in or knowledgeable about his financial crimes." After the call ended, David sat in silence. He'd prepared for Rebecca to lose her job. He'd prepared for their marriage to end. He'd even prepared for the public humiliation. But criminal charges? Prison time? "You didn't know," Thomas said quietly. "I knew she was having an affair. I knew she'd stolen credit from Paula. I thought that was the extent of it." Sometimes when you pull one thread, the whole tapestry unravels. Another knock at the door. David opened it to find Helen Park from HR, looking exhausted but determined. "Mr. Warren, I apologize for coming unannounced. But I thought you should know, the internal investigation has expanded. We found evidence that Victor and Rebecca weren't the only ones involved. There's a whole network. Managers covering for each other, HR personnel taking bribes, executives looking the other way." "How deep does it go?" "Deep enough that the board is discussing bringing in an external firm to conduct a complete corporate restructuring. Morrison Tower as it exists today may not survive this." David thought about the hundreds of innocent employees who'd done nothing wrong. What happens to everyone else? "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Helen said. "The board wants to create an employee protection program. Anonymous reporting, independent oversight, real consequences for violations. They want you to help design it." "Me? I'm leaving the company." "Are you?" Helen pulled out a folder. "This is an offer to become Director of Corporate Ethics and Compliance. New position. You'd report directly to the board. Your job would be to ensure what happened with Victor never happens again." David took the folder but didn't open it. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who did the right thing when it cost you everything," Helen said simply. "Because you can't be bought. Because those women deserve someone who'll actually protect them." 6 months later, David stood in a completely renovated Morrison Tower conference room. The old boys' club atmosphere had been gutted and rebuilt. Glass walls replaced closed doors. Anonymous reporting systems replaced HR gatekeepers. And David's new team of 20 compliance officers replaced the old system of looking the other way. The room was full. Paula Hendricks sat at the head of the table, promoted to senior associate, properly credited with the Henderson deal, and awarded the commission she'd earned. Beside her sat Nadia Foster, who'd accepted a position as Director of Women's Leadership Initiatives after her settlement with the company. 7 of Victor's former victims had chosen to join the new Morrison Tower, assured by legally binding protections and oversight. 2 others had decided to move on, which David understood and respected. "Let's begin," David said. "Monthly compliance review. Paula, you're first." The meeting was productive. Issues were raised, addressed, documented. No whispers. No fear. Just honest, professional discussion. Afterwards, Paula approached David privately. "I heard Rebecca's trial starts next week." David nodded. Rebecca had been charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. She'd helped Victor funnel over $800,000 in company funds through false expenses and vendor kickbacks. In exchange, she'd received cash, gifts, and ultimately, the stolen Henderson account. "Are you going to attend?" Paula asked. "No. My lawyer will monitor it, but I don't need to be there." "Have you spoken to her at all?" "Once. She called from her lawyer's office 3 months ago. Wanted me to testify that she was manipulated by Victor, that she didn't understand what she was doing." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd tell the truth if called to testify. That she's a brilliant woman who made conscious choices. That being in love doesn't excuse theft and fraud." Paula was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Blowing everything up?" David considered the question. His marriage was over, divorce finalized 2 months ago. His old life was gone. He'd been thrust into a position he'd never sought, dealing with corporate politics and media attention he'd never wanted. But he thought about the new employees who started at Morrison Tower now, who didn't have to navigate a predatory system. He thought about the women who could report problems without fear of retaliation. He thought about Paula getting the recognition she deserved. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it." That evening, David returned to his apartment, a different one now, in a quieter neighborhood. He'd sold the home he'd shared with Rebecca, unable to stand the memories. His phone showed a message from Thomas, jury deliberating in Brennan case. DA confident. Victor Brennan's trial had concluded earlier in the week. 12 counts of sexual harassment, coercion, embezzlement, and fraud. The prosecution had been devastating. 9 women testified. Financial records were entered into evidence. And the recording from that night at the gala had been played for the jury, Victor's voice booming through the courtroom as he threw underwear at David's feet and proclaimed ownership over another man's wife. The defense had tried to paint Victor as a man who'd made mistakes, who'd gotten caught up in consensual relationships that went wrong. But the pattern was too clear, the evidence too overwhelming. 3 days later, Thomas called with the verdict, guilty on all counts. Sentencing recommended 15 to 20 years. Rebecca's trial followed 2 weeks later. Her defense was that she'd been manipulated by Victor, that she'd loved him and trusted him, that she hadn't understood the legal implications of her actions. The prosecution presented emails showing Rebecca suggesting false expense reports. Text messages where she calculated their take from vendor kickbacks. Calendar entries showing her planning meetings to steal credit from junior employees. The jury took 6 hours to convict her on 8 counts. Sentencing, 7 to 10 years. David learned about the verdict from the news. He felt hollow. Not satisfaction. Not grief. Just a strange emptiness where his marriage used to be. Nadia Foster called him that night. "I heard about Rebecca's sentencing. Are you okay?" "I don't know what I am," David admitted. "I destroyed my wife's life." "No," Nadia said firmly. "She destroyed her own life. You just refused to let her destroy other people's lives too. There's a difference." "Is there? Sometimes I wonder if I did this for justice or revenge. Maybe it was both. Maybe it's okay for it to be both. She hurt you. She hurt all of us. Wanting her to face consequences for that doesn't make you a bad person." After the call, David sat in his empty apartment, thinking about the past year. Everything he'd lost. Everything he'd gained. The cost of truth. His phone buzzed with a message from Margaret Hollis, board meeting next week. "We want to discuss making the ethics and compliance division permanent. Doubling your budget. Making you VP level." Followed by another message from Paula, "Henderson client just referred us to 3 more companies. All specifically asked for me. Looks like having integrity is good for business. Who knew? Thanks for everything." And one from Yuki Tanaka, job posting went up for 3 more compliance officers. Received 847 applications in 4 hours. People want to work for a company that does the right thing. You built something real, David. David stood, walking to his window. Morrison Tower was visible in the distance, lights blazing in the evening darkness. A building full of people who could now work without fear. A company trying to rebuild itself on truth instead of power. He thought about Rebecca in prison. Victor in prison. The lives destroyed, including his own marriage. But he also thought about Paula's success. Nadia's return. The 73 women who'd come forward after the scandal broke, revealing similar abuses at other companies. The legislation being drafted to strengthen corporate accountability. The culture shift that was slowly, painfully, beginning to happen. The truth had cost him everything. But it had also built something new. His phone rang one last time. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Warren? This is Christina Wolfe. You don't know me, but I work at Hastings Corporation. I've been dealing with a situation similar to what you exposed at Morrison Tower. I saw your story, and I need help. I need to know how to do what you did." David took a breath. Then another. "Tell me everything," he said. "And then let's figure out how to make it right." Outside his window, the city lights blazed. Tomorrow, there would be another fight. Another battle against systems that protected predators and punished victims. Another chance to choose truth over comfort. But tonight, talking to Christina, helping her plan her own path to justice, David Warren finally felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. And for now, that was enough.